Let's talk about chapter 16. Chapter 16 is the beginning of the trial, and it starts off in the morning when the kids are at home in the morning with Auntie and Calpurnia, and they are having breakfast, and Jim is hungry, and you can tell that he's feeling better because his appetite has returned, and he eats a bunch of eggs, and the rest of the group's appetites were not very good because of what happened the night before. And so they start to have conversations about last night's activities at the jail with Walter Cunningham and that bunch and Tom Robinson. And so Atticus starts talking about it, and when Calpurnia walks away, Aunt Alexandra says, "Don't talk like that in front of her," and she's talking about Calpurnia, and so basically Atticus always comes to her defense, and he says anything that's fit to say is fit to say in front of Calpurnia. She's part of the family. And so then Scout says something, and she goes, "I thought that Mr. Cunningham was our friend. You told me one time that he was." And so he basically says, yeah, he is our friend, and he still is, but he just has a blind spot. He's basically a good man, but he had a blind spot. And so Jim chimes in, and he goes, "He was going to hurt you last night, Dad. What do you mean he has a blind spot?" And so he goes on to talk about, like, yeah, he may have hurt me a little bit, but he wasn't going to kill me because we do have history and we are friends. But you'll understand more when you're older, is what Atticus tells the children. You can't quite understand it now. And then he goes in to talk about, like, what a mob is and how people act differently in a mob mentality. And so he was giving him the excuse that Mr. Cunningham and those men were acting as a mob and not as individual people. And that's basically why they were acting the way that they were. And so then he kind of says something funny and chuckles to himself, and he says, basically, it took an 8-year-old child to bring them all to their senses last night, didn't it? Atticus said. And so he kind of chuckles about that. And then he goes on to say, hey, that does prove something. It proves that even a gang of wild animals can be stopped. A mob can be stopped, even though the mob theory is that, worse things can happen when people are in mobs, like people can get killed and stuff, than when people are by themselves or individual or small groups. So anyway, I think that's a little bit of foreshadowing to show that there's a little bit of hope that things can change and get better. And so anyway, then Scout goes on, and she says, well, the first time I see Walter Cunningham back at school, I'm going to punch him. I'm going to beat him up. And of course, Atticus is like, absolutely not. I don't want you to touch him. It's not his fault, and you will not behave that way. And so, of course, Scout throws a little bit of a fit, and she said, Aunt Alexandra chimes in, and she says, don't you see what you're doing? You shouldn't talk about this stuff in front of them. Look what it's doing, and don't say that I haven't warned you, Atticus. And so, of course, they're fussing again, like usual. And then Atticus says, Jim, I don't want you and Dill and Scout downtown today for the trial, because this is the beginning of the trial, and everyone in town is getting ready to gather, and it's going to be quite the spectacle. It is the biggest thing that's going on. Remember, we are in the Great Depression. There's nothing people really do, and this is a big spectacle, and it's free, and of course, pretty much everyone in the town is going to attend. And so Dill comes in, and he said, it's all over town this morning, and he says about how we held off 100 people with our bare hands. And so he's always a little, over the top with things in his stories. And so he comes in with the newspaper, and of course, Auntie is annoyed, and Atticus is kind of grinning and smiling just a little bit. But then Scout goes on to describe what it was like outside. She says it's like a Saturday, and people from all of the country, all the different sides of town come to town. She talks about how she sees Mr. Dolphus Raymond, and he's on his thoroughbred, and that people think he's always drunk, and he's drinking out of a paper sack. And then she said there's some Mennonites, and they say silly things like they don't have buttons, and all of their kids and themselves have blue eyes. Of course, they are talking about that their group of people are incest, which is actually very common at this time period for all groups of people, not just Mennonites or whatever, even the common folk. So then they talk about Mr. X Billups and how he rides by on a mule and he waves to the kids. Of course, there's a lot of friendly people, even if they're on the wrong side. And so that's what's very complicated in this story, is that even though, Mr. Billups or whoever might wave and be nice, they still act with some racism, even if it's not like explicit, it's still implicit. But anyway, the county, basically everyone in the county goes by them, and Jim and Dill give the histories of all these people. They start talking about all the gossip and stuff about these people, and they're kind of having a good old time. And then they go out and see Miss Maudie, and people are yelling at Miss Maudie because the Baptist foot washers say that Miss Maudie is a sin because she spends all of her time in her garden. It's very selfish. She should spend more time in church and reading the Bible. And so they're driving by and they're shouting at her. And so she defends herself by saying some things back. And so Dill asks Miss Maudie if she's going to go watch. And she says, absolutely not. It's morbid. And I don't want to watch this poor man on trial for his life. And it's like a Roman carnival. And so, she says, just because it's in the public doesn't mean that I have to go, do I? And so then Miss Stephanie goes by and she's excited and she's all looking fancy and she's, pretending to be her friend and she's going to go watch it. And so then the kids decide that they're going to go. And so even though Atticus tells them to stay home, they go ahead and head to town toward the courthouse. And in the far corner of the square, they see the Negroes, and they are sat quietly in the sun. They are eating sardines and crackers and flavors and Coca-Cola. And then they saw Mr. Dolphus Raymond, and he is a white guy, and he is sitting with them. And then Dill asked Jim, is he drinking out of, what is he drinking out of his sack? And so then they talk about how he's probably drinking whiskey out of a paper bag. And the legend has it that his Coca-Cola bottle is full of whiskey in that sack. And so then they say, why is he sitting with all the colored folks? And he just always does. He has a reputation of liking them better, supposedly, than he likes white people, and so he spends his time with them. He even had a black mistress or woman, and they had mixed children together. And so, it's challenging. This part of the conversation is challenging stereotypes, especially in this time period, that he prefers that, black people, and that... Also, Dill says that he doesn't look like trash because they have been taught that all black people are trash, which is absolutely wrong. And Dill goes, he doesn't look like trash to me. And Jim says he's not. He owns one side of the town. He's very wealthy, and he spends his time with African Americans. And so they're like, then why does he act like this? Why does he behave like this? We have been taught that this is bad behavior from someone. And they're like, that's just his way. That's what he prefers. And so that's how he lives his life. And so they kind of let it go. But then they go on to talk about mixed children, like he has one, and how it's very sad because the white people don't want anything to do with them because they have black in them. And the black people don't want anything to do with them because they have white in them. And so they go on, they have been told and heard stories that it's just really sad for black mixed children because they just kind of don't fit in their community. And so they decide, all right, well, let's go on in now. And they realize how crowded it is. It's so crowded that they can't even find a seat. They knew there was going to be a crowd, but they had no idea that there were going to be gobs and gobs of people standing everywhere. And so when they walk in, they hear someone say, let me tell you something. A person said, the court appointed Atticus to defend this inward. And the kids overhear that. And then they go on and they say, yeah, but he aims to defend them, which means he wants to. And that's what they don't like about it. And so the kids were like, oh, I thought Atticus did this because he wanted to. Now they understand that he has to. And so they were a little confused about that. But then they're like, oh, that makes more sense. But anyway. So they see Reverend Sykes, and he is going to help them find a seat, even though there are none left. So he invites them up to the balcony with all of the colored folks. So if you can imagine, all of the white people are down below in the courthouse, and all of the black people, African Americans, are up top, and they're in the balcony, and they're standing, and they also have to wait for all of the white people to fill in first because it's kind of just how things go, and it's kind of social norms at this time. So anyway, they go on up there, and a couple of people give up their seats for Scout and Jim and Dill because they respect Atticus so much, and they want them to sit down, and they're happy to have them in the balcony, just like they were in church. And so Judge Taylor, he's on the bench. He is old looking. He looks like your typical judge of this time period, white hair. He's kind of like really relaxed, and he has his feet up, and he's not taking things too seriously, but it's weird because he does actually take his job seriously. He'll look like he's not listening, Scout says. She's watched him a million times. And the next thing you know, he's, putting someone in contempt, or he's pulling out evidence that makes a lot of sense and does the right thing. And so she likes to comment about how he's a man learned in the law, and even though he doesn't really take his job seriously, it seems, he does have a firm grip on proceedings that come before him. And so they look around and they see Judge Taylor, and then they see Heck Tate. He's on the stand currently getting ready to testify. And then they see Atticus and all of them. So everything's getting ready to happen, and the trial is about to start. And Atticus does not know the kids are there.